Falun Gong. Falun Gong, also known as Falun Dafa, emerged in the early 1990s in China as a modern Qigong practice that combines breathing exercises, meditation, and moral teachings based on three core principles: truthfulness, Zhen; compassion, Shan; and forbearance, Ren. Initially, the movement was not political. It developed much like many other Qigong schools. Within just a few years, however, its following had surged dramatically, reaching an estimated 70 to 100 million people by 1999, a number that surpassed the membership of the Chinese Communist Party at the time. This rapid growth is what triggered tensions. On April 25, 1999, approximately 10,000 Falun Gong practitioners held a silent sit-in protest near the Zhongnanhai government compound. The peaceful demonstration was intended to request fair treatment, but state authorities interpreted it as a sign that Falun Gong could carry out large-scale mass mobilizations without government control. For a one-party state, such an organization was perceived as a threat to social stability. In July 1999, the Chinese government officially banned Falun Gong, classifying it as an illegal activity. State media then launched a widespread denunciation campaign, while international organizations highlighted the issue of human rights violations against its members. Since then, Falun Gong has grown into a global movement with large communities in North America, Europe, and Taiwan. Interestingly, this development has transformed Falun Gong from a Qigong-based spiritual practice into an international diaspora movement active in campaigns for human rights and religious freedom. Thus, the ban on Falun Gong was not merely a matter of theology or doctrine, but one of politics, demographics, and the state's fear of a rapidly growing and massive independent organization. Ahmadiyya. Ahmadiyya is a movement within Islam founded by Mirza Ghulam Ahmad in Qadian, India, in the late 19th century. Ahmad claimed to be the promised Messiah, a position that is highly sensitive in mainstream Islamic theology because it relates to the concept of the finality of prophethood. This claim is the root of the tension, not the community's worship practices or organizational structure. Socially, the Ahmadiyya are known for being disciplined and active in building schools, providing social services, and engaging in nonviolent missionary work. However, in geopolitical contexts where a specific religion defines national identity, the Ahmadiyya are often deemed deviant by local religious authorities. The most significant ban occurred in Pakistan. In 1974, the country's constitution officially declared the Ahmadiyya to be non-Muslims. Then, in 1984, Ordinance 20 prohibited them from using Islamic symbols, using the greeting Assalamu alaikum, calling their places of worship mosques, or propagating their teachings. Violations of these rules are punishable by imprisonment. Similar bans, though not always as strict as Pakistan's, have also appeared in Algeria, some Gulf states, and parts of South Asia, primarily involving restrictions on proselytizing and the construction of houses of worship. In Indonesia, the Ahmadiyya are not entirely banned, but their missionary activities are restricted. These limitations typically arise from social pressure and differences in theological interpretation, rather than from reasons of state politics. What makes the case of the Ahmadiyya unique is its combination of theological factors, doctrinal differences regarding prophethood, social factors, public sentiment, and political factors, the state's reinforcement of the majority's identity. As a result, the Ahmadiyya have become one of the most restricted religious communities, despite being known for their peaceful nature and lack of a political agenda. The Yazidis. The Yazidis are an ancient ethno-religious community living mostly in the Kurdistan regions of Iraq, Syria, and Turkey. Their religion is a blend of ancient elements: Zoroastrianism, Mesopotamian polytheism, Manichaean traditions, and elements of Sufism. Its core teaching centers on belief in a single supreme god and a prominent figure named Melek Taus, the peacock angel, who serves as the guardian of the world. It is precisely this figure that has been the source of misunderstanding for centuries. As a result of this misunderstanding, Yazidis have often been labeled devil worshippers, a designation that in no way reflects their actual beliefs. This theological label became the basis for restrictions, discrimination, and the banning of their rituals throughout various periods of history, especially under the Ottoman Empire, which once considered their religion heretical. In modern times, the greatest pressure came in 2014 when an extremist group invaded Sinjar, the primary Yazidi territory. The group issued a fatwa declaring that Yazidis were not protected as people of the book and then targeted them with a genocidal campaign: mass killings, sexual enslavement, the abduction of children, and the destruction of holy sites. The United Nations later officially classified this tragedy as a genocide. The prohibition and oppression of the Yazidis stem not only from modern state politics, but from a combination of theological misunderstanding, their status as an ethnic minority, and geopolitical conflicts in the Middle East. Despite this, the Yazidis are now rebuilding their community, including reconstructing the Holy Temple of Lalish and working to document their religion, which has long been passed down orally. The Bahá'í faith. The Bahá'í faith was born in 19th century Persia, modern-day Iran, originating with the teachings of the Bab and later developed by Baha'u'llah, who declared himself to be the next messenger of God after the great prophets Abraham, Moses, Jesus, and Muhammad. The doctrine that God's revelation is continuous and extends beyond the prophet Muhammad is the primary source of theological conflict, as mainstream Islam holds to the principle that prophethood ended with Muhammad, Khatm an-Nubuwah. This is the point from which historical tensions began. From its inception, Bahá'í followers were often viewed with suspicion by the Qajar and later the Pahlavi governments in Persia. The most drastic turn, however, came after the 1979 Iranian Revolution, when Iran became a theocratic state that officially recognizes only 4 religions: Islam, Christianity, Judaism, and Zoroastrianism. Because the Bahá'í faith emerged after Islam, its followers were not considered an officially recognized religion, and were instead labeled a heretical sect. The government views the global structure of the Bahá'í faith, which has its international administrative center in Israel, as an ideological threat and a potential source of foreign collaboration. As a result, systematic restrictions have been in place since 1979. Places of worship have been destroyed, community leaders have been imprisoned, Bahá'í students are barred from universities, and civil servants from the community have been dismissed. The international community has described this as a form of long-term administrative persecution, not merely social discrimination. What makes the case of the Bahá'í faith unique is its nature. Its followers do not engage in politics, reject violence, and emphasize the unity of humankind, yet it is precisely because of these global principles and its independent organizational structure that Iran views it as a threat to the state ideology. Outside of Iran, the Bahá'í faith is recognized and its followers live freely, but in its land of origin, it remains the largest unrecognized religious minority. Beta Israel, Falasha. Beta Israel, often called Falasha, a term now considered pejorative, is an ancient Jewish community that lived in Ethiopia for over 1,500 years. They developed a unique Jewish tradition, having been separated from the rest of the Jewish diaspora since ancient times. Their holy scripture is the Orit, the Ethiopian version of the Pentateuch, and their rituals blend elements of the Torah with local customs. These differences would later cause them to be seen as not purely Jewish by both religious and governmental authorities of certain eras. During the Ethiopian Empire, particularly under Emperor Yeshak in the 15th century, the community was considered outsiders to the Orthodox Christian order that served as the state religion. Yeshak issued a decree that prohibited Beta Israel from owning land unless they converted to Christianity. In some periods, their rituals were restricted and they were forced to assimilate. This prohibition was more political and state religious in nature than it was a matter of racial hatred. The government sought to unify the territory under Ethiopian Christianity, and any group that was different was seen as a challenge. In the 20th century, their fate changed dramatically. When the State of Israel was established and began to trace the roots of the global Jewish diaspora, Beta Israel was finally recognized as part of the world Jewish community. Before that recognition, however, they were often not permitted to practice Jewish rituals freely and experienced social and economic discrimination. The situation became critical in the 1980s when the Ethiopian Civil War broke out, leaving many of them unsafe. Israel eventually launched 2 dramatic operations, Operation Moses, 1984, and Operation Solomon, 1991, massive airlifts that moved tens of thousands of Beta Israel to Israel in a short period of time. However, the historical legacy of this prohibition remains. Christianity. Christianity is one of the world's major religions, yet during two distinct historical periods, it was severely banned. In ancient Rome, 1st to 4th centuries AAD, and in Tokugawa-era Japan, 17th to 19th centuries. Both prohibitions arose from a similar cause. The new religion was seen as a threat to state stability and national identity. In ancient Rome, the ban began because Christians refused to worship the state gods, including rejecting rituals honoring the emperor. In the Roman system, religion was not just a private belief. It was a public duty that signaled loyalty to the state. When Christians refused to participate in state rituals, they were accused of engaging in superstitio, a subversive practice. Consequently, from 64 AD, the reign of Nero, until the early 4th century, they faced various waves of persecution, including confiscation of property, public executions, and the dissolution of church communities. This prohibition ended with the Edict of Milan, issued by Constantine in 313 AD. Meanwhile, in Tokugawa, Japan, Christianity was initially introduced by Jesuit missionaries in the 16th century and grew rapidly for a time. However, the government feared the religion would weaken the feudal structure and open the door to European colonial intervention. In 1614, Tokugawa Ieyasu officially banned Christianity, closing churches, exiling priests, and forcing Christians into hiding. This ban lasted for 250 years. It gave rise to a secret community known as the Kakure Kirishitan, hidden Christians, who preserved their faith through practices disguised within Japanese culture. These two prohibitions demonstrate a common pattern. A religion is banned when it is perceived as a threat to identity, political stability, or state sovereignty. Nevertheless, both periods of prohibition ended with broader acceptance and freedom in the modern era. Tenrikyo. Tenrikyo is a Japanese new religion, Shinshukyo, that emerged in the 19th century through the teachings of Nakayama Miki, 1798 to 1887, a village woman who claimed to have received a direct revelation from Oyagami, God the Divine Parent. Its core teachings emphasize living the joyous life, yoki-garashi, promoting cheerfulness, social solidarity, and the practice of spiritual healing. In its early form, Tenrikyo did not challenge the state, but it appeared during a highly sensitive period, the Meiji Restoration, 1868, when the Japanese government was building a modern nation with a singular identity centered on state Shinto. During this time, Japan underwent massive reforms. The government sought to distinguish Shinto as a pillar of nationalism and to sideline movements deemed deviant from the state ideology. Tenrikyo, with its independent structure, unique rituals, and ability to attract a large following from the peasant class, was seen as a potential disruption to this project of national uniformity. Furthermore, the Meiji government was wary of charismatic religious movements led by common people, especially one led by a woman, something unconventional within the traditional structure. As a result, Tenrikyo was placed under strict supervision. From the 1880s to the 1930s, the government required the organization to formally affiliate with state Shinto, and some of its rituals were restricted. Its spiritual healing teachings were also criticized by the government and the medical establishment. In practice, Tenrikyo was not completely banned, but it was not allowed to develop independently and was forced to adapt its teachings to comply with the state only after World War II. When Japan abolished state Shinto, did Tenrikyo gain full freedom as a self-governing religious corporation. Today, Tenrikyo has expanded in Japan and abroad with a peaceful and non-political moral message. Cao Dai. Cao Daism is a syncretic religion founded in Vietnam in 1926, combining elements of Taoism, Buddhism, Confucianism, Christianity, and French Spiritism, as well as venerating figures such as Sun Yat-sen, Victor Hugo, and Joan of Arc. The religion is unique for its hierarchical structure, similar to the Vatican, its colorful rituals, and its doctrine of the unity of all world religions under God the Supreme Being. In the early 20th century, Cao Dai grew with extraordinary speed, reaching an estimated 1 million followers by the 1940s, and even formed its own armed militia to protect its community during periods of colonial turmoil and war. However, it was this socio-political power that later became the reason for its restriction. After Vietnam was divided into North and South in 1954, the Communist government of North Vietnam viewed Cao Dai as a feudal and religious organization with political potential that was out of step with state ideology. For the communist regime, an independent religious organization, especially one with a military structure and economic assets, was considered a threat to revolutionary stability. In the late 1950s, North Vietnam confiscated Cao Dai property, dissolved its central organization, and banned formal religious activities. Many Cao Dai leaders were arrested or forced to live as ordinary citizens without a religious structure. Its major temples, like the one in Tay Ninh, were located in South Vietnam, making it nearly impossible for the northern community to operate after the reunification of Vietnam in 1975. The ban continued until the 1990s, when the state began to loosen its control. In 1997, the government officially recognized one branch of Cao Dai, although supervision remains tight and several factions are still unrecognized. The case of Cao Dai illustrates how a religion can be restricted not because of its doctrines, but because of its social influence, mass network, and autonomous power, which are seen as competing with the state. The Falash Mura. The Falash Mura are an Ethiopian ethnic group with historical ties to the Beta Israel Ethiopian Jews community, but are distinct in their religious identity. The Falash Mura are descendants of Ethiopian Jews who, from the 19th to the early 20th century, converted to Christianity, often due to economic, political, or colonial missionary pressure. Despite converting to Christianity, many of them continued to maintain some Jewish traditions, leaving their identity ambiguous, not fully Christian, but also not recognized as Jewish by rabbinic standards. This ambiguity triggered their restriction and lack of recognition. When Israel began opening mass immigration channels to rescue the Beta Israel through Operation Moses 1984 and Operation Solomon 1991, the state recognized the Beta Israel as Jews under the law of return. The Falash Mura, however, were not automatically recognized because they were seen as having abandoned the Jewish faith. The Israeli government and rabbinic authorities considered that they would have to undergo a formal conversion process to be considered part of the Jewish community again. This restriction created a difficult situation. Thousands of Falash Mura lived in transit camps in Ethiopia, wishing to immigrate to Israel, but not falling into a recognized category. There was also concern that some individuals with no Jewish lineage were attempting to claim Falash Mura status for the opportunity to immigrate. As a result, Israel strictly limited and screened who qualified. In the early 2000s, however, the Israeli government began to relax its policy, allowing several waves of Falash Mura to enter Israel through family reunification channels and official conversion. Although never banned as a religion in the classic sense, this community experienced identity-based restrictions and ambiguous religious status and political obstacles that left them effectively unrecognized for much of their history. Ugandan traditional religions. Before colonialism, Ugandan societies possessed rich local belief systems, such as the Balubale of Buganda, Lubale spirit cults, Bakwezi traditions, and various forms of ancestor veneration. These systems played a crucial role in the social structure, customary law, and spiritual leadership of traditional kingdoms like Buganda, Bunyoro, Toro, and Ankole. However, when Great Britain made Uganda a protectorate in the late 19th century, this religious order came to be seen as an obstacle to the project of Christianization and colonial administration. Anglican and Catholic missionaries who received political support from the colonial government regarded local beliefs as pagan and superstitious. In the early 1900s, the colonial administration began implementing policies to ban traditional rituals, including spirit summoning ceremonies, consultations with mediums, and healing rites. Local shrines were burned or closed down. Many traditional spiritual leaders were arrested or forced to adopt Christianity. Colonial rulers viewed traditional religion as a threat for several reasons. Community rituals created solidarity beyond government control. Beliefs in the power of spirits and ritual leaders could mobilize the populace on a large scale, and Christianization was seen as a tool of modernization, requiring local religions to be suppressed in order to educate the population. Furthermore, the Buganda kingdom, which collaborated with the British, also had its own political interests. Christian Buganda leaders participated in suppressing traditional religious groups to expand their own power. After Uganda gained independence in 1962, some traditional beliefs were once again recognized culturally, though many had already lost much of their ritual structure. To this day, local spiritual practices survive, but often in more private forms and no longer holding the socio-political status they once had.